And if any of you have been following what's happening with the Kickstarter campaign, you can see that the overwhelming response really bodes well for the industry, that people are really demanding better quality music. And it's a great thing that Neil Young and Pono are doing. So here is John Hamm.
Thanks, Robert. I'm good on the laugh. Okay. So that's going to be a question microphone. Welcome. Are any of you Kickstarter backers? Have any Kickstarter backers in the audience? Just little higher hands. I'm doing something with this math. So if that's the percentage that are in on this group, we have a lot of headroom left in the rest of the world. So that's good. That's good. Well, for those of you who are backers, thank you very much. We'll talk about Kickstarter in a minute. I'm delighted to be here. It's interesting to be at an audiophile show because I've always said at Pono that you guys really aren't our problem. And what I mean by that is high-res audio has been available to hobbyists and enthusiasts and sophisticated audiophiles for a long, long time. And when Neil really invented this, he kind of invented it for the rest of the world. And I'm going to talk a bit about that today. But I'm really here just to explain to you what Pono is and isn't. It's one of the worst kept secrets in the world. It's also reasonably misunderstood. So with that, I'm going to play a couple videos along the way, so it'll be a little choppy to go in and out of that. But let me just get started and say that I have an ask of this audience today. I am definitely a card-carrying audiophile. I would say probably hardcore would be word. My wife can attest to this. It's pretty bad. Definitely 12-step program kind of thing at my house. But you know, as a card-carrying audiophile, it's always been about the music for me. I have an audio engineering background. Spent a lot of time in pro sound. Worked on the Claire S4 cabinet that is most of the concerts you've ever heard. I was on the design team of the first 64-channel all-digital mixing console with parametric equalization that folds up like an airplane wing. I went to Purdue University just down the road, grew up in Indianapolis. So I'm a Midwest boy. So I had a big early start in technical audio and then ended up in Silicon Valley for 25 years, having fun and running companies, and then got a call from Neil Young last March, and here I am. So I've had a blast doing it. My ask of you guys, collectively, is that you listen for the big picture. And what I mean by that is I was actually amazed at the amount of nitpicking that went on the bulletin boards in this Kickstarter thing. I was like, don't these people have something better to do? Really, I mean, the details are interesting. I'll go through them with you. But it's amazing the amount of energy somebody could put into an argument around like a decimal point being, I get it, okay, so. But the big picture here is about better sounding music for the masses. And really, in terms of inspiring the creative community to start recording music the way that we can now listen to it effortlessly. So listen for the big picture. I'm happy to answer any questions. I can go toe-to-toe with most people in this area. I would like you to help by spreading the facts of Pono. We did have a Kickstarter campaign. It was quite factual in terms of what we offered. We have a website that's the same. But we're a brand new company. It's a prototype device. And so there's some misconceptions out there. All the details on this product are definitely not settled yet. The Pono player I just had a few of you listen to is a prototype. It's got about 30% more engineering going into it between now and the time we hand it off to production in about the July-August timeframe. So, even the couple hundred people that have ever heard this thing haven't heard the one that we're going to ship. And so that's we have to be a little careful with that. Contrary to popular belief, or some belief, we did not invent high-res. We're not taking any credit for inventing high-res. I actually give a lot of credit to Norman David Chesky at HD Tracks. I think those guys have been incredible pioneers in this area. I mean, they brought up a store before it was a good idea to bring up a store. And they have really persevered to provide high-res and some education around high-res. And most of you who do high-res are probably customers of HD Tracks. So we really couldn't do what we're doing without those guys having been out there to begin with. But we're not taking any credit for the technology. We're all evangelists in this. And I think Neil's mission when he started it was really not for folks that could get there anyhow or would figure this out on their own. It was really to rescue Neil's words are, I want to rescue an art form. I mean, he looked at it and he looked at where music was headed technically. And at a, reasonably mature age, decided that it was going to be his life's work to try to fix it. With that, let me show you guys a quick video here. If you haven't, this was one of the incarnations of our Kickstarter video, but I'll just let you take a look at this. Got a little bit of artist support in here.
Woo! Transformation.
What happened in there?
Oh man, I just blown away by the sound. I've never heard music like that before.
That music made me feel good. Much better than I felt in a long time listening to music.
We listened to Aretha Franklin in the best sound quality you can imagine. How it's supposed to be listened to.
Music does something to you. It does something viscerally. It makes something happen in your soul. When you're hearing something, you really want to hear it and it sounds great. But you got to hear all of it. That's what makes the difference. You can either hear it well enough to recognize it and name it, or you can hear it well enough to live it and feel it. There's just no comparison between hearing the live music the way I hear it, either in the studio or when I'm playing live, and what happens on an MP3 or a download of low quality. They're just not the same at all, and you miss the magic, you miss the goosebumps, you miss the essence of the music.
It's true that an MP3 quality, above all or under all, is simply not. It doesn't give us back what we put down.
For the convenience and the portability of an MP3, oh, they're great, but it's a little bit like seeing a Xerox of the Mona Lisa.
The MP3 version, it's gone through those changes. It's sort of lost that original intention.
When artists go in the studio to make records, some of them spend an incredible amount of time on the details, and they work through the night. It's just a labor of love, and it's not right that you don't get to hear the fruits of their labors. All of that work can be reproduced because it exists, and Pono can bring you that.
Pono, to say that right, Pono, it was a very striking comparison. Very obvious to even my ears.
System that you're working on is Pono, P-O-N-O?
Pono.
Pono. What does it do?
That's Hawaiian for righteous. You want to see it?
Yeah.
I think I got it right here.
Okay.
There it is. That's it.
It really is a difference. It's like I don't know, curved and round and there's a dynamic. It doesn't seem like it hits a wall.
It gives them a certain sort of bottom, a certain sort of glue, but more than anything else, a closeness, an intimacy that digital recording can lose very easily.
That blew me away. It was like being in a recording studio. It was like we were listening to Bob Dylan. You could hear him playing harmonica right next to you. You could hear the drums and the backing vocals on Respect by Aretha. I haven't heard a sound like that since vinyl. And it's so impressive and it's so brilliant to hear that.
I want everybody to hear music that way. That's why, we're on Kickstarter, so that we can share this with everyone, and everyone who loves music can share in the release of Pono and the launch of the real music experience in the 21st century.
It's great that somebody like Neil, who cares enough about music and getting in its purest form, is going to bring that and give people the opportunity to hear what we're hearing in the studio. Whatever year it was, how it comes off the tape, right to your ears. It's organic as it gets.
Young people really have to hear music the way we used to hear it.
Well, it's what I've been waiting for. Yeah, for forever.
You've heard how I feel about Pono music, and
all right, so you get the point. We were going to get some popular artists involved, but we had to use these guys on this one. Let me just go back here. So the background is that Neil really went to the record labels about 2.5 years ago, and he asked them whether they'd be supportive of a new effort to bring studio master quality music to the consumer. And this was in the middle of when their business models were all blowing up around streaming, and none of them really had figured out what the consumer business model was going to be for music going forward. And what was interesting is they all had a very, very positive reaction to it. And they mostly had a positive reaction to it because they've been signing great artists for years and watching the quality of their product go downhill in terms of being delivered to the average consumer. So for them, it was like, hey, new revenue stream, better than the last one, focused on quality, get to highlight our label again, get to highlight our catalog again. This is all good news. So we had lots of support from the record labels. The artists, of course, are crazy about this. You know, I've talked to enough of the people on that video and other videos that we have to know that these artists have been, I don't know what the right kind of touchy-feely verb to use here is, or adjective, but they've been really dismayed at the ability for the lack of the ability for their music to reach the consumer the way they made it. I mean, if you were Ansel Adams and the best you could do is get a photocopy of the Yosemite picture out to the world, that would disappoint you. I mean, if you're a chef, you want people to eat your best food. If you're a photographer, you want them to see their best photographs. James Taylor said it really well in that video. He said, "You're just not getting what we laid down." You know, and that's really the artist's feeling about this is they go, as Neil said, they go into the studio and spend 3 weeks getting a drum track right. You know, they might spend 200 hours at $900 an hour in the studio just to get a sound right. And then they can't give it to you, or not you, but most people, in a way that's satisfying to them. So when we built this, we really built it mostly for music lovers. Now, audiophiles are inside music lovers, I think. I actually personally think there's 3 kinds of audiophiles. There's gearheads, there's music lovers, and there's both. I would say I'm in the both category, although at times I've been more of a gearhead than a music lover. And I think that I was always trying to get to the music, and I just got lost in the equipment for a few years at a time. And when I started doing Pono, I actually learned again why I had spent the amount of time, on audio that I have in my life, and it's to hear music the way it was made. I mean, I also play the guitar, and so if you hear acoustic guitar as you're playing it, you know what it's supposed to sound like. There's a lot of musicians that are interested in Pono. They get to hear music the way they know it's supposed to sound naturally in the world. So we built this for music lovers. Audiophiles were not an intended first audience. I think we felt like most audiophiles would be pretty curious about this. I think we're going to sell a lot to audiophiles because it's a really fun product. Music sounds really great on it. It's very approachable and affordable. We also felt like the consumer that had never been exposed to really good sounding studio master quality music, if we made something that a normal consumer could approach and use, then we could generate a whole nother level of interest in music that had largely not been in their reach. And then the thing that surprised us, I think, most in the Kickstarter campaign was the amount of energy in fan bases of artists. We actually cooked up this limited edition model for the Pono player 2 days before the Kickstarter campaign because we were going to do a Neil Young special. And so we were sitting around in a hotel room in Dallas at South by Southwest, and I said to Neil, well, if we're doing one for you, why don't we do one for like Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young? And he said, well, then why don't we do one for the Eagles? And, and so we just went down the line. And then I tried to get Neil to offer 1,000 of his, and he wouldn't have anything to do with it. He said, I'm going to have the same number as the other artists. They're going to be the price the same as. So I learned a lot about Neil in those 5 minutes. I learned that he sees himself as one of the musicians in the world, one of the artists in the world. He wanted to be on a level playing field with everybody. But what was amazing was the amount of energy that people wanted or had to connect to musicians that they loved, to connect to bands that they loved. These limited edition players come preloaded with 2 high-res 2496 or 24192 albums on there already. We load them like that, and they're the 2 favorite albums of the artist on the side of the Pono player. So it'll be interesting to see which 2 albums Elton John chooses, which 2 albums the Eagles choose, which 2 albums Beck puts on there. I did the Grateful Dead deal myself. I know what 2 albums are going on that one. I can't tell you yet. I'd have to shoot you. That wouldn't be good. But the energy of people connecting to those artists was just amazing. They wanted to be part of it. These are serialized and personalized Pono players. So we were really, I think, encouraged by that. It also tells us that I think we have a big opportunity to sell preloaded Pono players going down the road. So you heard Neil talk a little bit about the artist community. Their intent is to make music and have you hear it the way they made it. I can't say this enough, and I can't tell you how big of a part of our strategy this really is. This is an artist-driven movement around the intent for you to hear music the way they made it in the studio. I mean, if you think about it, it's a very odd idea to go in the studio, make something this good, and have you get this version of it. You know, that's just an odd idea. You know, when you buy a car, you don't get half the car that they tried to build you. When you order a restaurant, they don't, order good food, they don't spill half of it on the floor on the way to the table. But in music, it really doesn't come to you, at least normal consumers, in the way that they meant it to be. Musicians also have, if you're a musician yourself or you know them, an incredible commitment to detail. And that detail is the nuance that we're interested in bringing back. It's that last 10 or 15 or 20% of the feeling that you get. As Elvis Costello said, for convenience and portability, it's just fine. But it's like looking at a photocopy of the Mona Lisa. It just doesn't communicate the emotion. So Neil really did Pono to try to bring back the ability to communicate the emotion that the artist meant for you. Sidebar. There was an interesting study done about emotion and music and favorite songs and periods in our life that were meaningful to us. There was a survey done of 200 people, and they asked them to list their 10 favorite songs. Unbeknownst to them at the time, the theory was, and the data turned out, that over half of the favorite songs listed were a song that person heard between 13 and 17 years of age, regardless of how old they were. So if you think about what songs you love, they're probably songs when you were growing up. And those songs had an emotion, you had an emotional connection to those songs or those artists. We also know what kind of commitment artists bring to making good music. And so they're delighted about this movement, absolutely delighted. We're also really interested in getting back into the studios. Through the producers and engineers wing at the Grammy Foundation, we have the chance to really interact with several thousand recording and mixing and mastering engineers. The Pro Tools capabilities have been there for a long, long time to just record in 24-bit. A lot of people weren't using that capability. Now that we have better mastering tools, we don't have to worry about CDs as a physical medium so much. The whole loudness and compression thing is going to get a lot better. We're going to get the dynamic range back in these recordings. Were you standing ovation for that one? Yeah. And the other cool thing about, the other really cool thing about the mastering opportunity here is, we've had to master music for the medium for so long. There was an original analog master, and then there was an original digital master at some resolution. And then there were always a mix for FM radio, a mix for MP3, a mix for CD, and then obviously the vinyl was cut off the analog. But when we don't have to mix to a physical disc anymore on 1644 stuff or on 2448 stuff, it really frees the mastering engineer up to just have that sound great as a digital file and ship it. Couldn't do that in the old days. You had to have it sound great as a physical file or a digital file, then you had to put it on a plastic disc, put it in a machine, see how it sounded, and then go backwards until it sounded right. We can lose that whole step now. Which is why, by the way, for you audiophiles, that we hope and believe and think that our 1644 ones will sound better than ripped CDs. And it's because we'll be able to escape the mastering that was done to put it on a piece of plastic. So we think we got a big opportunity in 1644. Hi, Chris. How are you? Do you guys know Chris? Everybody know Chris Conacher? Audiophile, computeraudiophile.com. If not for him, there would be thousands and thousands of people who had no idea what they were doing on USB digital audio. So thank you for that. So when we went into the mission and the strategy, what we said was, and for those, did any of you see Neil? He was in Chicago this week. Anybody see him? You did. What? How was it? Yeah? Yeah, he's pretty great. Yeah. Yeah, he has a sound check every day, even if he plays in the same place as he played yesterday. Every day, sound check at 4 o'clock. He called me one day at 4 o'clock, and I'm like, aren't you supposed to be in a sound check? So where did he play? How many people? Yeah, so my wife and I saw him at the Dolby in Hollywood, 3,200 people. He played at a place in Dallas, 3,600 people. So he's starting to play these really small, intimate venues and doing a full solo acoustic set. And you just get the genius of this guy. He's really quite amazing. So our strategy was, listen, let's raise the awareness in the broader music-loving community around the quality of digital sound. You know, surprisingly, there's a lot of folks that don't actually know what they're listening to in digital. It's all over the place. I'm going to describe a little bit of that in a while. But, you know, it is an indication of the general understanding of the quality of digital music when I meet someone at a cocktail party and they say, I don't need that. I already ripped my 400 CDs into my computer. I got them all in there already. And then I say, did you change the settings? And they look at me like, what settings? Right? I mean, they had the chance to put it in losslessly, and it's in at 256 now on the AAC encoder. So I think, you know, that's the general level of kind of technical understanding about what we've been asked to listen to. And it was all for good reason, but we don't have to do it anymore. And that was a central theme of Pono, was that when Steve Jobs stood up in 2001 and said 5,000 songs or 1,000 songs in your pocket, he did that to make it convenient and easy, and memory was expensive, and capacity was expensive, and everybody was downloading Napster, and the files had to be small. And there was a lot of problems of physics about that time. And 14 years later, some of those things are still around. We still don't have infinite capacity or infinite bandwidth. But a lot of the reasons that we did to music what we did are not things we have to worry about anymore. They've been generally solved in the world. And so that was part of what we wanted to do, is say, hey, let's go back to the way music could have sounded had we not had to do that. The second thing we wanted to do is have a very approachable experience. So not just raise the awareness, but have an experience that was easy for normal people to buy a device for a reasonable amount of money. I'm not suggesting $300 is a pittance, but it's a lot less than some of the other sums of money it takes to experience this. And we wanted to have it be a very end-to-end experience, which I'll show you in a minute. And we wanted people to be able to try it and see for themselves, to let the music do the talking. I'm a golfer as well as an audiophile, and there's a phrase in golf. Are any of you golfers? Does anybody play golf with me? Yeah. So there's a phrase in golf called "let your sticks do the talking," right? It's sort of like it doesn't matter what you do. You're going to go out there, you're going to shoot a number, put it on the board, and that's who you are as a golfer. And we felt that same way about music. Let the music do the talking. I mean, if we're onto something here, it'll be pretty obvious to people when they hear the music. I mean, those 15 or 18 of you that heard it before I started, I think you could probably attest to that. So the strategy wasn't to talk anybody into anything or really to browbeat anybody or even to attempt to convince them. It was really to get them to take a chance. And, you know, we'll be shipping our Kickstarter units this fall. And which ones did you get? Pearl Jam? Yeah, he was an early Pearl Jam guy. Yeah, so that's great. So the reason we did Kickstarter was really just for that, just to connect with a broad fan base, to go right to the people that loved music, to give them a chance to get in line and get a device early and know what we were talking about. It was a very democratic, very kind of grassroots, outreach-driven thing. And we just thought there was no way to tell the story as widely, broadly, and loudly, frankly, as we did. In any medium except Kickstarter. The campaign itself became a story. And I learned a lot about Neil's media reach when we were down at South by Southwest. There's essentially no magazine or TV show that wouldn't scramble to have him on it in 12 hours notice. So that was pretty powerful. You actually got to interview Neil there. That was a great write-up you did. So we did a 35-day campaign. We had 18,000 backers. So that means 18,000 people that actually went to the trouble of getting their Visa card out, deciding they wanted to pledge for something, and doing it. And taking action is sort of different than thinking about it. So the fact that we had 18,000 people that kind of came into the program in 30 days, we just saw it as a huge outpouring of interest. We sold 10,000 of what we called the limited, it's really a pre-order, it's a limited edition Chrome and Clear. The Chrome ones were the artist special series that had the band's name or the artist's name engraved on the side. They were serialized. We sold 500 of each of them, and they came with 2 preloaded digital recordings. And what we learned most about that one was the connection to the artist. And then we sold 5,000 or pre-sold 5,000 of the black and yellows. We had over 8,000 comments on the site. I actually asked Chris if he could take over tech support in the first week of the campaign because we were completely inundated. And Pono was 3.5 people at the time. We're up to 5. So we're now fully staffed for all this. No, not really. But it was interesting. We even had groups break off and form their own communities. There was a group called PonoPeople.org. There was just a bunch of people that wanted to talk about this. They formed their own community. I mean, who'd have thunk? And you would never learn things like that except on Kickstarter, which is really kind of a fun thing. And we generated about $6 and change million. The vast majority of that, well over half of it, is just used to make the Pono players that were pledged on the site. A good portion of it past that is the work we're doing to bring up the site, get the music store in line, et cetera. So we got plenty of things to do with this. Trust me. They have them, and a few other people have them. But for most people, they didn't want that stuff. It's big, it's hard to work with. You got to figure out where it came from. You got to make sure it hasn't been upsampled. You got to understand some provenance issues and some mastering issues and some storage issues. And so it wasn't something everybody wanted, but we wanted it. And we wanted to find out what was the best copy of that track or album in the world in digital form. So I get a lot of questions about whether we're going to remaster, remix, or redigitize music, and the answer is no. We are not mastering engineers, although we could probably get a group together that could do pretty well doing that. But that's not our job. We don't want to do that. Nobody remixes these tapes. These are signed off by the artists. If you want to remix something, you got to get the artist back together and get it re-signed off. But we are not going to remaster. What we will be doing is asking the labels if we can get their 1644 or 2448 or 96 or 192 flat masters, because then we sort of escaped that physical mastering step where we needed to put it on a medium. The artist community, as you saw, is well behind this movement. We have a bunch of partners in the technology area. Our friends in Minneapolis, Jim and the crew at J River, are assisting us in building a desktop management system for the high-res music. Really good content network provider called Omniphone, which specializes in high-res. And then, of course, we had the opportunity to work with Air, Charlie Hansen, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. And then the last thing we have as an asset is we have Neil. And Neil is an asset not just because of his popularity, but because of his reputation. He's got an unbelievable reputation in the music business. Have any of you ever been lucky enough to go to a Bridge School concert in California? Probably not. Oh, you have? Great. So you know that Neil has a clout with younger artists that has a mentor kind of underneath to it. Artists want to be around Neil. They respect a guy who's had a 45-year career like he's had and made 50 albums and, sold a few million concert tickets over the years. And young artists look up to him. He's never branded himself. He's never sold himself. He's never been involved in things that were overly commercial. And Pono's really not an overly commercial effort. We have to be somewhat commercial to create a business out of it so we can be here. But Neil's really always been about the music, and he's got an authenticity and a genuineness and a commitment, and he's the sweetest guy in the world, and he's incredibly committed to this. This is his legacy. So what we decided to do at Pono was really make an end-to-end experience to get back to that approachable thing where any consumer who could take one of these out of a box, hook it up to their computer on a USB cable, and click a few buttons could experience high res. Plug in a pair of headphones, put a cable into your stereo system, and all of a sudden you're listening to music at a resolution that, for the most part, non-audiophiles just won't do. Many audiophiles did this a long time ago. They read Chris's site, they figured out how to get their USB DAC set up properly, they changed their MIDI settings on iTunes, or they put in Decibel or Amara or Pure D, and they were off to the races. But that group of people, of which I am one, is not the mass majority of music lovers. That's an audiophile group, that's a hobbyist enthusiast behavior, and it's fantastic. But we really wanted to get past that. We wanted to move to something that was much more approachable. So we got the music rights done, we had to build a delivery system, which we're in the midst of doing, and then we made the Pono player. And this whole thing was really based on the notion that in every product, is that first thing showing up? That's a cup of coffee on that first one. It didn't come out very well. But our view was that music was really suffering from sort of a lack of a good, better, best environment. And good, better, best has been around in product marketing for as long as there's been products. The Sears catalog started this 150 years ago. You could buy a $5 wrench, a $10 wrench, or a $20 wrench. And music seemed to have lost this structure. So we just went back and asked ourselves, well, what if we could do good, better, best and it was equally convenient? That there was no difference in using good or using better or using best, or a very minor difference, not a difference that would keep you from doing it. You know, cars can come in good, better, best, but you kind of know how to drive them all. They're not more difficult or less difficult to operate. So that was kind of the product management notion. And we looked at the way music had really evolved. We said, well, started out a long time ago and everybody had records. So we started in better. And then, you know, we made CDs out of them, and some people ripped those CDs. That was fine. And it's arguable, this is where I said don't nitpick the charts because it's conceptual, is that, you know, CDs were probably a little more convenient and a little less good sounding to most people, especially the early CDs. If any of you have any CDs made between 83 and 88, as you know, they're not your best CDs, right? They have that shrill harshness to them, and we really didn't know how to make a CD in that era. And on the back, it usually says AAD or ADD, right? So, you know, we started out with records and CDs, and that was fine. And then, you know, we went to Napster and iTunes, and we were able to put 5,000 songs in our pocket. But we definitely went backwards. We gave up quality for convenience. Nothing wrong with that. And then we didn't really do this necessarily in this order, but we ended up with streaming, and we ended up with high-res downloads, and we ended up with Pono. Now, the reason I'm not trying to suggest by that location of that icon that we're asserting our music to be any better than the best high-res downloads. I have an experience promise up there, which means if you listen to my music on, or our music on our player, we're kind of predicting that it'll be a pretty well-controlled, fabulous experience. So that was kind of the way it went. And I think if you look at it now, what you got is a world where two of these things look like they want to go away. Now, I don't mean go away completely or for everyone, but in general, if you look at the numbers in the music business, downloads peaked last 2 quarters ago, and they were down actually precipitously this quarter. And CD sales have been declining kind of gradually for about 4 or 5 quarters. Now, there's still about $8 billion worth of music sold between the purple and the blue, disc there, and about $250 million worth of vinyl. So that gives you some order of magnitude. But if you really look at where it's heading, you know, streaming looks like it's having its way with MP3 downloads. Vinyl looks like it's going to kind of be the better version of the CD for those folks that like that analog sound. And really, the two other options, and I say these as one thing. So don't get worked up about the fact that I've separated Pono from high res. That's one movement up there. Whether you buy it at our store, HD Track store, or Mark's store, or lots of other stores. We just want people to listen to better music. So we're going to bring up a store. So what I think you get here is you get an environment that may end up looking like this. Oops, sorry. Where you just actually end up having okay and fabulous. And if you want convenience, you're going to try and get it as good as you can get it, as long as it's convenient. And if you want quality, you're going to try and get it as conveniently as you can. But we really have a quality buyer and a convenience buyer. And they're going to buy the highest of the other factor they can. So I'm a convenience guy, okay, what quality can I have? I'm a quality guy, okay, what convenience can I have? And I believe it may head this way a little bit, of course, over time. I still buy CDs. I rip them at lossless, build a live, it's one of everybody out there. So it looks like we could be in a world where if you want to own music, you're going to own it at really high quality levels. You're going to build libraries. You may still buy CDs. You may buy high-res downloads. You may buy 1644 or 2448 downloads. But you want to own it. You want to have a library. You want nobody to ever take it away from you. You want to be able to listen to it wherever you want to listen to it, et cetera. And kind of like every other context, that's fine. I'll rent it. I'll stream. Spotify at 320 is good. Sonos systems are neat. And that's a world we think we could end up kind of moving towards, is owning quality, having your own library, and renting convenience. We'll see. It's not a promise. It's just an idea. So then we went and built this player. And we built it in 2 versions, the black and yellow, which I have here, black and plugged into the wall yellow. These are prototype players we've been working on for about 1.5 years. They were designed by a guy called Mike Nuttall, who was the original designer of the iPod when he worked at IDEO. And these are prototype players that have been around for a long time. This one's quite beat up. The paint's chipping off of it. It's got a nick in the corner. Still works. And these are the ones that we've really been using to test and demo and figure out what we wanted them to be when they grew up. We get a lot of questions about why is it triangular, why is it the way it is? And the short answer is because we purpose-built this for nothing but playing music. And that form factor gave us a lot of advantages over a flat form factor. We could put a battery in there that was a little quieter. We shielded it a little bit different way. We have some proper audio capacitors in there that you'd never find in SOIC form or board mount form, surface mount form. And so we were just able to use it. Think of it as a small piece of audio gear. And that's really what it is. It's a small piece of audio equipment. And so we optimized it from the beginning to do one thing and do it one thing really well. And that's to render digital files. Render them in their highest resolution. And we just put two outputs on it, a volume-controlled headphone output with about it's about 5 ohm output impedance, so it drives anything, and a line-out output. And it's surprising how good these things sound in home stereos. I demoed this down in a dealer at Southern California in Santa Monica about 3 weeks ago with a long splitter cable into some Constellation hardware and a pair of Wilson Alexias. So what's that, $150,000 worth of stuff? And I had a $300 handheld player in my hand, and it was unbelievable. So, you fix it at the source. So we were really thrilled. In fact, the first time I met Robert was the first time I met Charlie at the Rocky Mountain Audio Fest last year. We were looking for someone to really come in and help us add some audio engineering value to this player. And Charlie Hansen, who any of you guys know who Charlie Hansen is, the CEO of Air? Yeah. An amazing man, a savant engineer. He was one of the most talented bicyclists in the world for his age group, won lots and lots of road races. And then he got hit by a car 11 years ago in Boulder, and he's paralyzed from the waist down. And I think what happened, I don't know this, but I think what happened is Charlie redoubled his efforts at music. He had something taken away from him that he loved. And the other thing he loved, he still had the chance to do. And if you look at Air's products, the last 10 years of Air have been pretty amazing. This guy is for sure obsessive about audio quality. He's a passionate audio guy. He's a passionate musician. There's no detail too small for Charlie. And I challenged him. I said, Charlie, can you take some of the technology in the QB9 and the KXR and a few of the other groundbreaking products you've made over the years and see if you can get any of it into the Pono player? And he took that as a challenge and came back and really blew us away with what he has. So the players that we'll ship in October will have a whole dose of Charlie Hansen's genius in them, which we couldn't be more delighted about. When we try to explain this to most normal non-audio files, we really have to get back to a file size kind of idea. And the file size comparison that most people understand is the sending of a photograph to a friend. And as Neil said on the tape, it's not good enough to recognize music. You don't get to hear it. You don't get to feel it in all its glory. You can recognize a photograph on the lowest one here. If it's a photograph of your house, you'll still get it that it's your house. But there's just a lot north of that if you're interested in what else could be in that photograph. What other information in there that could move you, that could create an emotion of your child's face or the car you've been restoring for 6 years and catch the sheen off that bumper. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to do actual size music, right? So actual size music is the whole song, everything we can get. And so the promise of Pono is that we will sell you and play on our Pono players the finest digital copy of that song or album available in the world. This is kind of a geeky chart, so I won't spend any time on it. But the ecosystem looks a lot like iPod, iTunes. There'll be a store. We have a J-River desktop and a Pono player. We fulfill this through a company called PCH. And then there's just a payment back end and a music back end. And Chris, I'll give you these slides if you want them. So it looks a lot like the old iPod world, where you had iTunes and you toggled between the store and the player, and you had a library. Okay, so everybody's like, you're going back to the iPod way of doing things. I was like, I thought it was pretty good. We all had a lot of fun in iTunes for a long time. It was a great place to manage your music. And we're starting there because it's a known kind of behavior pattern. And then the thing we really want to add to this is something we learned in the Kickstarter campaign, which is how much people love to talk about the music they like with other people that are like-minded. The ability to find a recording and share it with somebody else who would love that recording. A lot of sites are trying this. Spotify tries it with shared playlists. Beats tries it with some of their curation. Pandora's been doing this for years with Mixology. Apple does it in the Genius function. But we learned a lot in the Kickstarter campaign about what people taught each other about music they loved. And so we're going to make this store incredibly social. So critics and naysayers. I was actually, the first 3 days of the Kickstarter, actually you were around for this. The first 3 days, I could not be, I was inconsolable. I was like, I'm going to take that guy on. Let me at that guy. And I realized it's just, my team's like, John, relax. You will never win this. You know, no matter what you say, they'll say something else. And I realized that we just needed to be better at communicating what we were trying to do. I just ultimately said, if people are being grumpy, it's because they don't understand what we're doing. And so, you know, most people that were complaining had never heard it, probably never seen it, and yet they had an opinion about it, which I found odd. Most of the comparisons were apples and oranges. It's like, well, you know, what's wrong with my MP3 on my iPhone? Nothing. It's great. I didn't say anything about that. So we were really battling this notion that we were trying to replace or take away or do something wrong in the business of listening to digital music, when in fact all we were doing is putting another offer on the table. And what we hoped people would say is, hey, either like it or I don't, but you must understand the customer and their love of music. And that's really what we're trying to do. The can't hear the difference thing is, you know, as we watched the press on Pono, there were a few articles that really got pumped up and shipped around the music world about. There was one quite scientific one that said there's absolutely no basis for being able to hear the difference in this music. Your ear can't hear it. The physics of listening don't support it. And we were like, wow, okay. So, but how come everybody says it sounds better? And so we just decided we couldn't traffic in that. It was just sort of like, if you don't think it sounds better, okay, but a lot of people do. We had the files too large capacity thing. We had the back to the iPod thing. So what we really got to was, if you don't hear it or value it or want it, it's okay. I mean, we just felt like a street fight in this area just wouldn't serve anyone. I mean, we couldn't win it. If we won it, we weren't sure what we got for winning. Teenage daughter. So, you know, our critics and naysayers probably are going to be there for a while. But what we're hopeful for is that there's not, and we just don't think there's much to say about it between now and October. And what we're hopeful of is that when 10,000 people have these in October and another 5 or 8 or 10,000 in December on our second shipment, that we can just have enough people out there that say, hey, I have one, I heard it, I love it, it's fantastic. If you don't like it, that's okay. But we'll be much better understood when we have 10 or 15,000 people who own one of these things, they have their own music on it, and they can talk for us. And we just decided not to continue down that. Our belief is that value is related to passion, and that a hamburger is not a hamburger is not a hamburger. And a song is not a song, you know, a song is a song is a song is maybe not true. And that if you're passionate about something, you place a different value on the long tail of execution, the long tail of quality. You know, there are many things in our lives that good is plenty good enough. For a lot of people, that's not true about music. For some people, it is. For a lot of people, it is. So the position we wanted to take was, hey, if your passion has you go down the value curve, then you're probably philosophically compatible with us. And if you're not, that's okay. And we also have to remind ourselves that music, like art and food and wine and everything else, is an extremely subjective process. We debated so long and hard about whether to load the Pono player up with a bunch of MP3s and when we shipped it. And I sort of went back to, Joanna and I have a home up in the wine country in Northern California. And I went back to kind of my wine tasting experiences, and I realized that I hadn't been to a single winery that believed in their wine and thought it was great wine and wanted you to taste it, who put a glass of lousy tasting wine next to it just to make sure you got the difference. They just don't do it. What they do is give you a glass of their wine and say, how'd that go? Did you like that? And we felt that way about music. is that the comparison's one for people to make when they make it and decide how much it's worth to them and decide if they value it or not. But there just wasn't anything in proving an objective argument about a subjective topic. And I think we feel the same way about measurement to a large degree. You can measure the hell out of something, and if you don't enjoy listening to it, it doesn't matter much. And by the same token, if you enjoy the song, who cares how it measures? And that's coming from a hardcore audiophile who went to Purdue University and has an audio engineering degree. So I understand that part of it, but it's a subjective process, and it's always about loving music. So our distribution strategy is to start at PonoMusic.com. We'll move to audio specialty retail at some point, probably out to a dealer network in the US, and then to specialty retail, maybe Amazon, those kinds of things. We do have some ideas about the 2.0 Pono. Obviously, we'd love to try to have a more connected device a year from now or so. The challenge there is that for any of you who've done engineering in the communications world around audio equipment, it's not trivial to put a Wi-Fi or a Bluetooth chip next to audio componentry and have it sound good. It's a non-trivial engineering effort. I didn't say it's impossible, but we didn't have time to get it done on this rev. We'd love to have this connect with the world, but honestly, our first product was intended to simply communicate the quality of the recording, to render the music in as high a quality as we possibly could. And if we don't get that done, kind of doesn't matter what it connects to in the world at some point in the future. So we were really focused on that as job one. And then, other form factors, a home unit, we don't know about that. But the Pono player as it exists today is going to be around for a while. We want to work with the labels on the cost of high-res content. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit more expensive than standard res, just like video is. And there's a big company down in Cupertino called Apple, which kind of sets the pricing in most of the music of the world. And so an Apple digital album is about $11.99 or so, and singles are $1.29 or whatever they are. So you kind of know where the floor is, right? You can't get below that, regardless of what you have. So I think over time, this is going to get better, and certainly new business models are going to get better. So Pono's really three things. It's a movement, and we really learned that in Kickstarter. This is a movement of people that want something better in the world. We're delighted to have voiced that movement. We feel like to a large degree all we did was say what everybody wanted. Neil had the media power to do that in an unusual way. We got a lot of press coverage. We got a few people that were non-believers, and that's okay. But we had 18,000 people get off the couch and go on their Amazon and buy something and support the movement. It's really an initiative because it's based on a message, and the message is artists want you to hear music the way they made it. And that's not a phrase that we own exclusively in the industry. If you flip through audiophile or the Absolute Sound or Stereophile, you'll see that advertising feeling in a lot of audio equipment and even in some software. So we don't propose to be the only people who say that or think that, but I think the more the better, and that's how we feel. It's a more the merrier kind of move for us. And it's a company with an ecosystem because we want to be around for a while. So with that, I'd say thank you to anyone who's supportive of us. Those backers, appreciate it. Can't wait for you to get your Pono players. We will ship in October. We're on schedule to do that. There's 1,000 problems to solve between here and there, but we've got a good team on it. And we were fairly far along in our prototype when we went to Kickstarter. So I'd like to take a few questions. Yeah. Oh, microphone. Oh, Liz has one.
Well, this is very informative. The question I have for you is, since Pono isn't going to be actually mastering the music for the files, will you still be exerting any influence or any quality control over the stuff that you put up for sale? And in particular, my interest, and I'm so relieved you at least acknowledge the loudness wars. I want to see files that capture all of the original dynamics of that recording.
Yep.
And the problem is the trend in digital mastering, unfortunately, has been not to make, and this is a dirty secret, but not to make remasters that sound better, they just sound louder. And to get them to sound louder, you first have to crush the dynamics. So are you working
with
there's
two topics in your question. I think I know where you're headed, just in the interest of time. There's two questions here. One is sort of a best practices idea for recording. The other is provenance, and we're really understanding where that recording came from. We have contacts at all the labels, guys like Nico Bolas and Steve Berkowitz and Damian Lewis and people like that know where this stuff is hidden. I mean, you can't just walk in and ask for the 1971, you know, highest res version of Simon and Garfunkel Bridge Over Troubled Water unless you know which one you want. So we're really going to spend a lot of time getting back to understanding what the original recording was. If we can figure out what it was made on, you know, there's a spec sheet on that recording somewhere. We can't do that for everything in the catalog. But for the stuff that really are those master recordings, we care about provenance. We care about the chain of custody on that recording. On the other side of things, we're going to get into sort of a little bit what iTunes did on Mastered for iTunes, which is really a recommended recording techniques. So that if you want to play on Pono, here's the way you should record, or the way you should master, or the way you should mix. That's going to take a few years to get in there. I think people are going to do it on their own. The Grammy Foundation Producers and Engineers Wing is 100% behind us on this. Neil got the award from the Grammys this year for the artist most committed to sound quality. That was pretty helpful to 3,000 recording and mastering engineers in the country. So we're on it. There's a lot of stuff that we won't be able to fix from the past. But remember, we have the ability to go back and get that original flat master before the compression, before the dynamic range was squished.
And will that information be available in the store so people know whether this is a newly created digital master, what the source tape was, who the mastering engineer was?
Yeah, we're going to try to put as much metadata as we can. Metadata is a whole nother can of worms, but anything we know about it, we're going to put up, including if we went and got it. The other thing we have the ability to do is ask the studios to make some high-res stuff for us that isn't high-res yet, to go back to the original analog and put it in 24/192 with no compression, no parametric EQ applied after the master tape, those kinds of things.
Is the Kickstarter campaign still active?
Unfortunately and unfortunately, it has ended. It ended a week ago Tuesday. I say fortunately because it was like taking a red eye every night for those of us on the Kickstarter. But it ended two Tuesdays ago on the 15th of April. We ended it on tax day, just so that we made sure we got that $300 before people had to deal with their returns that day. Yes?
If there's a certain amount of high-res music out there right now, HD tracks,
Yeah.
sounds, all that, if that's X today, what will it be in a year or so?
In terms of quantity? Yeah, so Warner has the most high res of any of those labels by a pretty long shot. You know, Universal's had a video-based, a Blu-ray oriented effort, and as you know, Sony's had their DSD effort that came from the SACD movement. So both the other labels have actually had another movement in high res for many years. Warner actually, under Edgar Bronfman Jr.'s leadership, was really smart about 5 years ago. They just started archiving in high res. And in fact, they didn't do it because they wanted to release a lot of high res. They did it because they were worried about the archival of all of their precious recordings. So there's more material from Warner than from anybody else, especially at 24/192. But I think you're going to see everything, you know, sort of next year and beyond start to be available, you know, at least in 24/48. And that's the big move, getting to 24-bit recordings. You know, the sampling frequency, if we could have 96 or 192, we'd love it. But man, if we could get everything to 24/48 as a starting point, that'd be a huge move up for music. So I don't think there's any debate that it's going the right way. And now the studio, I mean, part of what we did at Pono was to create a business case for doing that. You know, we'd like to give them a reason to do it. It wasn't very interesting to do something in 24/192 if you're selling it in MP3. Oh, this side of the room has all their questions answered for some reason. I was so much clearer to this half of the room. Smart people on this side, is that what it is? Yeah. We got a string of folks over here. Go ahead.
Well, it's a quick question. When are the rest of us going to be able to buy one?
We're going to have a pre-order site the 1st of June on our site. We still have some capacity in December. What happened is we sold out the supply chain for October of some of the critical parts in Kickstarter. So what we did is the last ones introduced actually had a December ship date over the last 10 days of Kickstarter. We had to stop promising anybody anything in October. We moved it to December. So for the ones that we order as the 1st of June on our own site, they'll get December shipments until that supply is gone. By early next year, we'll be able to stabilize it so that you can get one in, you know, a week or whatever. But right now, you can still get one in December, time for Christmas.
So I was a first day Pono supporter, and
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
What'd you get?
I got
the Neil Young was open, and then I had to go do something for like 3 hours and came back.
I'm sorry about that.
I had to get CSN and Y, which is
Oh,
all right.
good.
Yeah.
I think that's what my wife got.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a great one. I think we're going to put the Dark Star album on. But anyhow, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So
Maybe
the
Dave
question I
Dudley.
have is, it's on the first day of the Pono site, you actually had a lot of descriptions about, if in your FAQ you were basically saying you would support other high-def music. If you already have
Absolutely.
it, you'll be able to load it up.
Absolutely.
But one of the things I was wondering about, and it really is kind of a philosophy thing.
Can I stop you for 1 second? That's a great point. I'm sorry I didn't make it. This player is not proprietary. If you have high-res music today in WAV or AIFF or FLAC, plays beautifully on our player. You can play your ripped CDs on here in whatever form you ripped them. You can play our music on Askell and Kearns and Hi-Fi Man and whatever. So there's no walled garden here. Our player's completely opened, as is our music. Thank you.
But now, to take that a step further would be the idea of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Will the ecosystem support other content,
Sure.
like other high-res stores?
It's a JRiver desktop.
Okay, and then and it's the philosophy, are you going to be a company that's really making it off the device or on the content? And then are you guys going to end up making an end run? If you get enough devices out there, you could actually have artists go directly around labels and things like this. I mean, you could really, it's from a philosophy standpoint, you don't have to get into it, but I was just wondering if you could.
Well, it's an interesting set of questions that would take another hour to do justice to, but let me do a quick version of all of those. In the short run, the player's important to Pono because the music store is going to take a while to come up, and we don't want to raise $1 zillion of venture capital and a whole bunch of other things. So, we're selling the player for kind of the lowest price we can sell it for and help the company, come up and be a company and be funded. The music store will take a while to get up. I think over the long run, the cost of the player will come down, the store will get bigger, it'll all work like that. That'll be great. In terms of artists, we had an unbelievable amount of independent artists that came to us and said, can you just put my music on the Pono store? There are bands out there without label contracts, small bands like Fleetwood Mac who don't have a label contract. No, seriously, they have no contract, right? You're going to, the YouTube revolution, the record companies are great, but there's a lot of people out there that just are independent artists, and, to the extent we can manage all that, I don't know that we want to become a label, but we're certainly open to any of that music being downloaded and play on our player. Doesn't require that it has a Warner or a Sony or a Universal badge on it to play on our player. There's a ton of great independent labels out there. We've had probably 300 or 400 inquiries from little niche labels that have 15, 20 releases, and they want to make sure it plays on Pono. Yeah, everybody who listened to my player today listened to my HD Tracks library. Thanks to Norman David. Yeah, same thing. This is a movement. One more question? Yeah.
Hi. First, I got to tell you, ordered the yellow one because I thought the prototype look was just the most fun for something like this. So that's
the iconic one, right?
Right. My question is, going back to when you put together the business plan.
Yeah.
Versus where you are today? What's the biggest surprise?
Probably the interest in connecting to the artist through the player. That took us by surprise. It was like, everybody get out of my way, I want the Foo Fighters one. And you can put Foo Fighters on one of these two and it's the same, but it's not a Foo Fighters player anymore. So the connection to the artist was the thing that I think we were so gratified to just see people want to do something that the artist had. By the way, it's an interesting validation of Neil's credibility in the music industry. We did every single one of those limited edition players with an inscription on the side of the band and the right to put 2 digital albums out there without ever talking to a lawyer. Imagine that. No, imagine that. Like, oh, well, my lawyer will call your lawyer and we'll send over our documents. No, we have 1 day to do this. So, Neil's manager calls the manager of the Eagles, who's Irv Azoff, who trained under Elliott for 10 years. Hey, Irv, can we do an Eagles version? Sure. We had an Eagles version out that afternoon. So that's Neil's credibility in the music industry, and we'll get a lot of benefit out of that. Yeah. About right now it looks like about 7 or 8 hours, but we haven't really tested it because we Our firmware is not optimized for power management yet, but it's probably longer than you want to listen in one sitting. Yeah. I'm going to be around tomorrow for some press stuff. I might play it in a few rooms. I did forget my long splitter cable, though. Well, anyhow, thank you so much. I appreciate your patience and your interest, and delighted.